It's a shocking fall from grace in less than a year. P. Diddy went from beloved music icon to disgraced sexual predator, at least according to the charges from the feds. Right now, he's behind bars in New York, the same place where just last year he was given a key to the city. It was a disturbing set of allegations that led to Diddy's arrest in the way of multiple civil suits brought by accusers, and in some of those suits, co-defendants are listed, and in others, celebrities. Could it be a time of reckoning for them too? We're taking a deep dive into all the celebrities listed in Diddy's civil lawsuits and whether they too could face federal charges. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News, a groundbreaking case brought forth just this week when 54-year-old Shah Diddy Combs was arrested on September 15th. He now faces some pretty serious federal charges: racketeering conspiracy, trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy was indicted by a federal grand jury and is now being held in Brooklyn at the Metropolitan Detention Center. After he was twice denied bail, Diddy's attorneys say he was in New York for about a week before the arrest, anticipating the federal indictment. But he wasn't the only one who kind of saw this coming. After federal investigators raided 2 of Diddy's homes back in March, we kind of had an idea something was on the way. Just this week, we learned some of the items that investigators collected during those raids of Diddy's homes in both Miami and Los Angeles. According to the indictment against Diddy, investigators seized more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricants from his homes. The court states that these items were used in something referred to as freak-offs, which were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. According to prosecutors, Diddy and his associates transported commercial sex workers over state lines, and even international. Diddy then allegedly gave these sex workers and victims controlled substances, at times unannounced to the victims, prosecutors say. Diddy did this to keep the victims obedient and compliant. He then took videos of victims having sex with these sex workers, sometimes without their consent. After all this, both Diddy and the victims would receive IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. Federal investigators say that during the raids of Diddy's homes, they collected some of these recordings showing the disturbing details of these freak-offs, and the feds had a heads up about these recordings, thanks to some of the civil lawsuits filed against Diddy, namely the one brought by Rodney Jones, also known as the producer. Lil Rod worked with Diddy on his Love album, starting in 2022, and says he experienced months of abuse, all at the hands of Diddy, in his lengthy civil suit. Lil Rod refers to these recordings, saying, quote, "Required Mr. Jones, that's Lil Rod, to record him constantly. Mr. Jones has secured hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff and his guests engaging in some serious legal activity." Lil Rod's lawsuit also lays out some other pretty disturbing claims, like that Diddy sexually assaulted him and forced Lil Rod to have sex with a prostitute. But Lil Rod's lawsuit came out swinging in more ways than one. Not only did it shed light on the dark allegations against Diddy, but it dropped some high-profile celebrity names too. First, there's Academy Award-winning actor Cuba Gooding Jr. Lil Rod alleges Diddy was, quote, grooming him to pass him off to his friends. This fear became reality when Mr. Combs introduced Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. while they were on Mr. Combs' yacht. The lawsuit includes pictures of this too, showing both Diddy with Cuba and then Cuba with his arms around Lil Rod. Court docs go on to say, quote, Cuba Gooding Jr. began touching, groping, and fondling Mr. Jones's legs, his upper inner thighs near his groin, and the small of his back near his buttocks and his shoulders. He rejected his advances, and Mr. Gooding Jr. did not stop until Mr. Jones forcibly pushed him away. Here's former prosecutor Melba Pearson. In the last couple of years, there were allegations against him for sexual assaults. So now we had those prior allegations, and now we see him tied to this case as allegedly trying to, assault others back in on misdemeanor charges of forcible touching and sexual abuse after allegedly groping a woman in Times Square. By the next year, 3 women had come forward accusing him of non-consensual sexual touching. He eventually reached a plea deal with prosecutors that required 6 months of counseling. But no jail time just this summer. He appeared on Dan Abrams Live where he discussed those charges when you pleaded guilty to a forcible touching misdemeanor in 2022. Eventually led to a guilty plea of a lesser charge. A year later, you settled a federal civil lawsuit. 2 more civil misconduct lawsuits. Can you understand why some would say, don't want to cast this guy? Sure, but I can also understand some people who come up to me in the street all the time and yell, show me the money. And say, hang in there and I see what you're going through. You know, you make movies for an audience of people. Right, so right now, I'm making a movie for faith-based people who are excited to know our hope in humanity, especially the times we're in dealing with politics and the world issues that are going on. So that's where I am now, and have you expressed regret? Sorrow, apologies for what happened previously. Everything that happens in my life is for a reason. I believe that, and if I continue to walk on my path, whatever that is, I know at the end result,
and no
it'll
longer
be
has
to
a
make me
voice who will
stronger,
pursue
to be a better
justice for
person,
her accusation.
to be a better father.
As of the taken against
And
Diddy,
right now, that's
no
the
expansion
moment
of the
I'm in.
investigation,
Back to Melba
no
says,
isolation
it's
orders,
possible that
no
charges
equipment
could be brought
access,
against the actor.
no suspension of attorney
I am
communication.
getting the feeling where
Everything
there's
inside
smoke, there's
solitary
fire.
block C
Right,
continued as
because
before.
now we have 2
Everything
different
except the
instances where
fear.
you're accused
If a
of the
female
same
warden
type
can
of
vanish
behavior.
after a single
You
nothing
know, years
except the
apart,
fear.
I
If a
think
female
there's something
warden
there,
can
and I don't
vanish
know.
after a
Cooper
single
Jai
note,
Jr. is
ones who
going to
once
escape
worked
from
overnight in that
that
area,
one because he
the ones
already
who
saw
filed for
definitely
leave without
people
giving a
moving
reason,
away
the
from
ones
him
who
within
saw but
Hollywood
never
circles
spoke.
and
No
other
one
circles.
mentions the note.
Once
But
those
everyone
first
knows it
sexual
appeared.
assault allegations
And if
came
what
out.
it says is true,
So at this
then
point,
punishment.
I don't think he's
Part
going
3.
to get away
The person
with it
no
a second
longer in the
time.
system. The internal
Is it
personnel
possible that
database
he
of
could
the
face
Atlanta
charges
Federal
based
Detention
on these
Center updated
allegations
its
that were
weekly
brought
roster.
forward by Lil
Under the
Rod?
category Special
It is
Personnel
possible
Code
as well.
Adjustment, the
Again,
name
we've
of
got the
Warden
statute
TD
of
was marked as
limitations
removed
issued to
from
deal with.
system by
So
administrative
depending
order.
on the time
There was no
frame of
decision
when
number
this happened,
recorded, but was
is,
deactivated.
again, the Adult
Her personal
Survivors
contact
Act, which was
information
vehicle,
disappeared from the internal
where many
network
these
exactly
lawsuits came
36
out when,
hours
if these
after
civil
she
law
filed
school
her
suits,
complaint. The changelog was
came out there
executed
was
from
a
the
fin,
system's
and out
highest
of time
access
for
level
those suits to
server,
be filed.
a device
The
bearing the
time frame is going
identifier
to be very, very
DCCA1,
important.
located in the
What
coordination
witnesses
office
come
on the
forward
4th
because,
floor
again,
of the Security
this
Administration
may not
Wing.
be a situation where
Only
DNA
2
may
individuals
be at play.
possess the
This may be
authority
more
to
of a
perform a
situation of,
system-level
hey,
personnel
yes, I was
removal
there.
at that tier,
And
the
I
head
recall,
of Federal Human
Cooper
Resources
Jennings Jr.,
and Detention Center.
putting his hands on the
No
L-Rod
confirmation
or,
exists
recall
as
certain
application was
aspects.
made.
So it's going
The
to be a
removal
very
of Warden
witness-intensive
TD's
type
name
of
was
case.
not
And
accompanied
the
by
question
any
is, will
or
the
protective
witnesses
reassignment.
be willing to come forward?
At 11:20
Another
a.m., a
high-profile
printed
name
copy of the
listed in
personnel
Lil Rod's
deployment chart
lawsuit
was
is
generated in
Jennifer
preparation
Lopez
for the
from
new
the
week's
standpoint
schedule.
of the
Under the
names of
section marked
celebrities
Internal Alert,
that were tied
TD's
to
name.
the fact that Jennifer Lopez was tied to this back when she was involved in a party to a shooting at a nightclub when she was dating Diddy, and is now alleged to have brought the gun with her to the scene and gave it to Diddy, and that's how the shooting occurred. Lil Rod's team brings up J-Lo when establishing Diddy's history, writing, his quote, Rico enterprise has existed for, at least, dating back to the 1999 nightclub shooting in NYC, when Mr. Combs required his then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez to transport his illegal firearm into the NYC nightclub. The court also alleged Diddy forced his then-artist Shine to assume responsibility for the shooting of several individuals. Shooting happened on December 27, 1999, at about 2:55 a.m. A fight broke out at a nightclub in New York City between Diddy, Jamal Barrow, who's known as the rapper Shine, and Matthew Allen, who went by the nickname Scar Guns, were drawn and 3 people were shot. No one suffered any life-threatening injuries, and the victims were not involved in the fight. J-Lo and Diddy fled from the scene in a car, but were later arrested and charged. J-Lo's charges were dropped, but the others stuck. Diddy was acquitted, but Shine was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was released in 2009 and deported back to his home country. Of Belize, Lil Rod alleges it was Diddy who pulled the trigger and Shine just took the fall for him. Because of this allegation, experts like former FBI agent Bobby Chone say investigators could take a second look at the shooting if there's a civil lawsuit that lays out this major allegation. What would it take to reopen an investigation into something that happened 25 years ago? Well, it would take it would take a different look at it. So, in other words, he was acquitted on the state murder charges. Now, federal charges can be different. You can have RICO. You can have a continuing criminal enterprise. You can have, the underlying acts, the predicate acts, if we used to call them when I worked RICO cases, a RICO predicate act could be something like that 1999 case, and you can use it as a predicate act. You can bring it up in, when I worked cold cases of this type sometimes with time, with the passage of time, people aren't as intimidated and they're not as threatened, and they get away from the person who was the threat. And they feel more forthcoming to testify or to give statements in testimony. But certainly, I think that that case is going to be part of it. In the aftermath of that, they have witnesses that say he bragged about intimidating witnesses, paying off jurors, certain when you have that kind of stuff, if you go back and you find that juror that was paid off, or jurors, multiple, that may have been paid off, certainly that gives you the impetus to kind of come forward and refresh those charges on a federal case. So the federal cases will be a little different. The charges are a little different, so it's not double jeopardy. And so I think that case that you mentioned, that you cite, I think is certainly one of the ones they're looking to build into a much bigger, to me, maybe a RICO type case. We also know that federal investigators have spoken to other plaintiffs in civil cases against Diddy to learn more about his personality and what he's like in relationships. That means J-Lo is someone the feds will want to talk to if they haven't already. It also means she could be called to testify against him. It's possible. It's absolutely possible. If I was the prosecutor handling that case, I absolutely would list her right. But of course, we need to know whether or not she'd be cooperative. That, of course, changes the strategy when it comes to trial. So you may list someone as a potential witness. That does not mean you're necessarily going to call them. The question is whether or not they're going to testimony is really going to help you. But there is a universe where she could testify against him in terms of, violence, in terms of his interactions with other artists, especially the folks that have been coming forward alleging that he has harmed them in some way or engaged in, human trafficking and sex trafficking. So was she aware of any of that going on? Did she see him with underage girls, or was she present for when some of those videos were taken? That little Rod included screenshots of those videos in his pleadings. So how much of that did she know? When did she know it? And what actions did she take at the time? Is that part of the reason why they broke up? We don't know. So all of this will to be seen. Obviously, the prosecution and law enforcement need to speak with her, get a statement from her to understand what she knows or what she'll be able to testify to, and then make appropriate decisions from there. But it's not just artists that Lil Rod named either. He specifically mentioned Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, in TEDx. It reads in part, quote, Mr. Combs was known for throwing the best parties affiliation with and/or sponsorship. Mr. Combs' sex trafficking parties garner legitimacy and access to celebrities, such as famous athletes, political figures, artists, musicians, and international dignitaries like British royal Prince Harry. Why even name Prince Harry? There's no allegations against him or anything, but why bring him up? I think it may have been a move to bring more credibility to the filing and say that, basically he being Diddy, was using his fame, fortune, and influence to insulate himself. So he was able to legitimize some of the activities he was doing by having these lavish parties, bring all these A-list celebrities, but somewhere in a back room or somewhere in another wing, horrible things were happening. So the fact that Prince Harry was there does not necessarily mean he was participating in what was happening. And just because you were at a party doesn't mean what's happening in every inch of the house. I mean, if you think about it, if the part is being thrown in a mansion, there are various floors and wings. So it is completely possible that he was there and did not participate. Now, you had said Prince Andrew, especially as a result of the allegations that came out in connection with the EPA scene case, that they were close and that they traveled together. And, there was a person that alleged that he had sexually assaulted her while she was underage. That would be a different story. But Prince Harry, and the way that it was mentioned to be very, again, just sort of trying to bring legitimacy and talk about these were the people that he surrounded himself by to protect himself. Prince Harry has no criminal charges or even any accusations of illegal activity, but he could still be inside of a courtroom defamation case. It's possible that Prince Harry may be able to preserve his reputation, and since it was such a minuscule mention in the greater context of this filing, he may be okay. Another celebrity mentioned in Lil Rod's lawsuit is Young Miami, who dated Diddy from the lawsuit. Young Miami's cousin assaulted Lil Rod during the Thanksgiving holiday in 20. Similar to Prince Harry, there are no allegations against Young Miami herself. So there's probably no worry of charges being filed against her, but there could be charges against some of the other people listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit. That's people like Diddy's chief of staff, Christina Korum, who Lil Rod compares to G.L. Maxwell, the longtime companion of Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein died by suicide in 2019 when he faced numerous charges of sexual assault over the course of multiple years. Maxwell was charged and found guilty of sex trafficking in relation to her time with Epstein, and she is currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. Lil Rod says Christina Korum ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Mr. Combs and ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms to Mr. Combs and his celebrity guests who were present on his rented yacht and his homes in La NYC. Miami. This is referenced in Diddy's indictment too, saying members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and other Combs business employees, facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel rooms. For the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substance, baby oil, lubricant, extra linens, and lighting. Federal prosecutors also alleged these associates arranged travel for victims, and commercial sex workers delivered large sums of cash to Diddy to pay these sex workers, and even scheduled the delivery of IV fluid. So, according to Melba, it's possible some of these associates are charged too. None of these cases, when you have these high-profile people that have been using people over years, these cases happen without a hand. Kelly had a handler, Epstein had a handler, Weinstein had a handler. Everybody has in those scenarios of those powerful people,
and no longer has a voice who will pursue justice for her accusation.
Does their dirty work.
As of the taken against Diddy, no expansion of the investigation, no isolation orders, no equipment access, no suspension of attorney communication. Everything inside solitary block C continued as before. Everything except the fear. If a female warden can vanish after a single nothing except the fear. If a female warden can vanish after a single note, ones who once worked overnight in that area, the ones who filed for leave without giving a reason, the ones who saw but never spoke. No one mentions the note, but everyone knows it appeared. And if what it says is true, then punishment. Part 3. The person no longer in the system. The internal personnel database of the Atlanta Federal Detention Center updated its weekly roster. Under the category Special Personnel Code Adjustment, the name of Warden TD was marked as removed from system by administrative order. There was no decision number recorded. It was deactivated. Her personal contact information disappeared from the internal network exactly 36 hours after she filed her complaint. The changelog was executed from the system's highest access level server, a device bearing the identifier DCCA1, located in the coordination office on the 4th floor of the Security Administration Wing.
abuse
Only
by
two
Diddy.
individuals
Starting,
possess the
she was
authority
just
to
19
perform a
years old,
system-level
and at the
personnel
time, he was
removal at that
37.
tier, the
According
head
to
of Federal
her suit,
Human
Diddy
Resources
was prone
and
to
Detention
uncontrollable
Center.
rage and frequently
No
beat
confirmation
Cassie
exists as
savagely.
patient was made.
Cassie alleged
The removal
Diddy
of
forced
Warden
her to use
TD's
drugs
name was
and
not
would
accompanied
physically
by
beat
any
her
or
or
protective
force her to have
reassignment.
sex with prostitutes.
At 11:20
And there's the
a.m., a
allegation
printed
that
copy of
on
the
at
personnel
least two
deployment chart
occasions,
was
Diddy
generated in
demanded
preparation
Cassie
for the
hold
new
his
week's
gun
schedule.
in her purse.
Under the
lawsuit
section
goes
marked
on to
Internal
state,
Alert,
quote, there
TD's
was
name
no clear reason why Mr. Combs required her to hold his guns, except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous. This echoes a similar allegation made by Lil Rod about Jennifer Lopez's part in the 1999 New York nightclub shooting. Not only did Jennifer Lopez allegedly bring the gun to the club, now we're also looking at, years later, Cassie coming forward and saying that Diddy forced her to carry a gun with her when they went out to different events. So again, I think that this is more along the lines of when you look at this from a domestic violence lens, from the standpoint of the abuser being very controlling and demanding certain activities to prove loyalty to, basically put yourself in a bad situation. Only he can be the one to save you, basically. So in seeing that the parallels between J-Lo's experience and Cassie's experience, number one, it brings more credibility to what Cassie said in her pleadings, but also, again, it causes us to look at Jennifer Lopez and be like, some of the comments she made about the end of her relationship to Diddy in terms of, well, there was infidelity, and, she kind of skirted the issue a bit, but when you start to look back at her comments, you start to think, oh, were you in a domestic violence relationship with Diddy? Much like how Kat ended up in a domestic violence relationship with him, Cassie kind of broke the floodgate, so to speak, when she made her civil suit back in November. These crazy allegations, we'd never heard anything like it before, and then all of a sudden we have several more people coming forward, and then more when it turns to 2024. So we have multiple plaintiffs who are coming forward alleging very similar things. I'm wondering, without these civil suits, would we even be here right now? Would Diddy even have been arrested and indicted? I really don't think so. Because Cassie's loss opened the floodgates, and I think it empowered other survivors to come forward and tell their story. And when Little Rod came forward, I think that was just another huge, moment in this case, because now you have male victims coming forward, and we know statistically male victims of sexual assault generally don't report for a number of reasons, but they many times view it as an attack on their masculinity, and they're very concerned about how they would be viewed publicly. And Little Rod was brave, which I really commend his bravery in standing up and saying, listen, this is what happened to me, and that empowered more and more folks to come forward, including most recently Danity K, one of the members of Danity K, stating that he had abused her and she had witnessed the abuse he had levied on others. So I think that all of these voices coming forward saying, listen, there's something here, the feds took notice, and even though they may not have been public about it at first, we knew, obviously, when they searched the houses, we knew that this was getting very serious, but they were monitoring this the minute that Cassie filed her lawsuit, and they read those allegations. I can assure you that investigations started immediately, and then as more and more survivors came forward, again, the feds would be going and interviewing each of those people, seeing what evidence they have. So, for instance, do they have maybe some cell phone footage? Can they substantiate what occurred to them in other ways? Maybe follow-up text messages, emails. All of these things are aspects that they are able to use to now bring in their case in chief against P. Months ago, we reported that Cassie was working with federal investigators in the case against Diddy. Can't know for sure whether she testified in the grand jury hearing that would ultimately indict Diddy, but it's likely at least some of his accusers did. I do believe that a number of the survivors would have testified. I don't think that they would have brought all of them because of the fact, number one, you want to testifying is traumatizing, especially when you're talking about the most awful day, likely of your life, and some very degrading things that happened to you
and you have to tell that to a bunch of people you don't know. So you have to be very cautious in when and how you bring your victims and your survivors to testify, and think about that in terms of your strategy, because again, you may want to save some of the survivors for the actual trial if this does go to trial, and maybe just pick one or two that make the point, right? And then you can fill it in with more evidence as the trial proceeds. But you don't necessarily have to show all of your evidence to the grand jury. You just pick the strongest pieces of evidence so that, again, you're not burning your survivors out before they get to the point of trial unnecessarily. Obviously, they do have to testify and, tell their story so that the jury has something to deliberate on. But at the same token, you don't want to push them too much because, again, that trauma is very real. And even if they are getting assistance through counseling or something along those lines, still a lot to have to talk about it, especially in such a with the huge media frenzy around it. And so many people weighing in, and whether it be social media or other celebrities or things like that. So those are some of the things I think the assistant U.S. attorney would have been considering when deciding who should be brought in front of the grand jury to testify. And when it comes time for trial, we could expect to hear from Cassie or other accusers in federal court. You're bringing up a really good point because, as you said, this is probably one of the darkest times of the survivors' lives, and they have to come forward with these serious allegations and relive the trauma that I'm sure they've been working to overcome. It's really tough, but we're assuming that a lot of them are going to testify at the trial, whenever that may be, and there are several accusers that have to go through and do all of that. What would it look like at the trial? Then at the trial now, the key is that the U.S. Attorney's Office has to make sure that they're not going too far afield with bad character evidence. We saw how that kind of backfired in the Harvey Weinstein case, where, as well as Bill Cosby case, where other instances were brought in that were maybe not as close in time, or more so, not really enlightening the jury about what happened in the charges that were in the indictment, but more so, he's just a really bad, horrible, predatory person. That may be the truth. However, when it comes to proving the charges at hand, you have to be very focused on making sure the jury understands what happened during the time frames that are specified in the indictment. And so, if some of these other survivors, let's say something happened 10 years ago, that might be too far in time for them to be able to testify. But if we're talking about an instance of something that happened last year, for instance, that might be closer in time to allow them to be able to testify. And again, if they have specific knowledge about certain aspects of the indictment, of course they'll be brought to testify. Again, you have to be very cautious because you want to be able to preserve, if you're able to get a conviction, you want to be able to preserve it on appeal by not making these types of errors. After his indictment this week, Diddy pleaded not guilty to all charges and was denied bond twice. Statement from his legal team reads, quote, Diddy is a music icon, self-made, entrepreneur, loving family man, and proven philanthropist who has spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children, and working to uplift the Black community. He is an imperfect person, but is not criminal. To his credit, Mr. Combs has been nothing but cooperative with this investigation, and he voluntarily relocated to New York last week in anticipation of these charges. Please reserve your judgment until you have all the facts. These are the acts of an innocent man with nothing to hide, and he looks forward to clearing his name in court. More updates are sure to come in the case of United States versus Diddy, so make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page so you don't miss a thing. Reporting for Law Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.